Throughout most of the year, on the altar or right behind it, there's a beautiful brass cross that shines out. It's one of the first things you see when you come into the sanctuary, when it's dark. When it's bright, the thing that you'll see is the cross that is in the windows in the front. Let me aim it up a little bit. You can see that. During the season that we're just beginning, the season of Lent, we have a different cross on the altar. It's a wooden cross. It's not made to be especially beautiful. It's just two pieces of wood, smaller probably than the actual cross was, because there's not much there to hold the weight of a human being, even one that was emaciated and had already lost a lot of blood. One that would be, pardon the expression, dead weight. But we put this up as a reminder of what the real cross, the historical cross, would have been more like. There's always the danger when we know how things turn out of wanting to jump to the happy ending and forget about the terrible middle, which is why you see people at Christmas and Easter, two very happy times. But what connects them is a lot more. And one of the things that absolutely holds them together was Jesus' execution. What happened on Good Friday is central to our understanding of who God is and who we are. If you go into a church and you don't see a cross, you know that there is going to be something absolutely missing from their theology, that there's going to be something that they're avoiding. And we all do it, one way or another. So during this Lent, I'm going to be preaching on a series of sermons that are all on one text. I'm not going to read the whole thing every time, and I'm not going to try to look at the entire text every time. But it's an important one where Paul talks about the centrality of Jesus' death, and his death in a very public and very gruesome way. A public execution that the Romans tried to use to terrify, and when I say terrify, I mean instill terror on the population of Judea. They were an occupying force, and they didn't care what it took to hold on to things. There's a phrase from a Roman poet that you'll hear, how the Romans would make a desert and call it peace. Jesus' execution was far from the only one. It was something that they did to many people. Jesus' execution, however, his crucifixion, stands out among all of them. Not because of what happened, but because of who he was. God came to us with love, with mercy, with kindness, with hope, with joy, with all the things that we as human beings need. and we killed him. We turned our back on all of the things that he came to give us so that we would no longer face the consequences of our sin and have a way out of the life of sin that is, as we often say, the way it is. And that's why he was dangerous to the Romans. In part, not just because the fact that people were looking at him as a possible king to stand up against Rome, but I think it went even deeper than that. I think it could have been any political system that would have looked at him and said, we've got to do something about this guy. Because he stands as a challenge to any system, whether it's a political national system, whether it's an economic system, whether it's a family's systems of living, whatever system it is that judges in a way that God does not judge, and that seeks to control people with power, seeks power for itself, and puts itself in the place of God. Jesus challenged all of that. And the interesting thing, and what made a difference and pushed him beyond the level of a mere prophet, because the prophets did that too. They would stand up to the kings and say, "Thus saith the Lord." And they were right. And it's a wonderful thing that they did that. But in the case of Jesus, it wasn't just somebody who said, "This is what we need to do. Clean your act up." He's the one who brought with him an entirely different system to put in its place. A system of love, a system of trust, faith, caring, sharing. And no, we haven't lived that out, far from it. But at least we know what we should be doing. And there are times when we do the right thing. And there are times when he helps us and transforms the things that we don't do right, the mistakes that we do make, the sins that we do commit. And even those can be turned to God's purposes in God's way, in God's time. And the biggest demonstration of that is the way that Jesus, being executed, took on voluntarily, all the guilt that could ever be in the world. Took it on himself when he had none himself, and took it away. The only person who ever could take it away did. And so we can live in a world without judgment. Not a world without justice, that's something different. But a world where sin does not get the last word, and neither does its consequence, which is death. And that's what Easter is. Showing that death could not hold Jesus. Death, therefore, cannot hold those whose sins he has taken away. And the cross then becomes not something shameful, a sign of failure, a sign of destruction, but it becomes a sign of victory over those things. A sign that God can turn death into life and does turn death into life and will transform an entire world and all the entropy that goes with it into something eternal and something wonderful. And so this is the passage that we're going to be looking at all the way through Lent. It's a passage in which Paul speaks of things that he says will make no sense to most people if you're tied into that way of looking at things where might makes right. And the one with the biggest toys is the one who's doing best. And the one who has the largest heap of coins at the end of the day is the one who wins. It's a word about what it means when you look at life and you measure it in different ways. And this is what Paul said to some people in Corinth who were already Christians, but they were still trying to prove that one was better than the other and trying to import their usual ways of having one-upsmanship going on into the life of faith. And it just doesn't belong there, is what Paul was saying, because what we're called to is the life that Jesus led, and it's a different kind of a life. So this is from 1 Corinthians, first chapter, beginning at verse 18, where he says this. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. But to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. For it's written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where's the one who's wise? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. That's what we're going to be concentrating on for the next few weeks. And it's well worth concentrating on, even when Lent is over. Think about our own lives. That's what Paul goes on to say. He says, consider your own call, brothers and sisters. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what's foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what's weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God. He's the source of your life in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, in order that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. Jesus set it all aside. He showed us what's important and what matters. Not our position, not what we have, not our titles, not our education, not our eloquence, not our influence, not how many likes you get or how many followers are registered on your site, not how large your house is, not how recently your car started being parked in the driveway, not even having a driveway, not even having a car, not even having a job. All of those things are good. But what makes us worthy in God's sight is simply that we're loved by Him. How many people have a place in their heart for somebody who doesn't return it, or other people look and say, how can you care about that? Fill in the blank. And yet they do. Love isn't about what you get out of things. Love is what you put into things. God put His own image into us. God became one of us. And in the cross, we can see a sign of that love. Take this away from this passage, if nothing else. It's not anything that comes from any part of human life that makes human life so beautiful and so wonderful. What makes it so is the fact that God shares it with us, so that we can share God's life one day with Him. And that's the cross. This is not what I had written down as my sermon. This was going to start out as the introduction to other things, but I think in some ways I'd rather just leave it at that. Come join us for Lent, a time of setting aside, but also a time of receiving from God. Happy Lent, everybody. See you soon.